a child who only knew how to draw spiders. No one understood why. At first, it seemed like just a habit, an unimportant detail. A notebook scribbled here, a forgotten sheet of paper there, until it became impossible to ignore. Spiders on every page. Spiders in the margins of school books. Spiders even drawn in charcoal on bedroom walls. And the scariest thing, they were all different, as if each one had a life of its own. Parents would ask, "Why do you only draw this?" She just looked down, but the girl listening to something no one else could hear. The days passed, and her silence began to weigh on her. The drawings didn't stop, they just multiplied, until a disturbing detail emerged. In some of the scribbles, it wasn't just spiders. There were also doors, dark doors with rusty latches. Doors just like the ones at the back of the house. The basement. It was then that the mystery took shape, because the girl had never been there. Never. Every detail of that door I drew. The question echoed without an answer. How could she know? And what was really behind that darkness? It was a simple house with narrow windows and walls peeling with age. The once light paint had turned a dull hue, faded by the rain and the merciless sun. In the backyard, a few plants stubbornly survived amid the dry earth. There was no luxury, no new furniture, but there was life. There lived an ordinary family made of repeated gestures of small routines that gave meaning to the days. The father woke early, always with heavy footsteps down the wooden hallway that creaked with every movement. The mother patiently prepared the coffee that filled the kitchen with its strong aroma. At the simple wooden table, already scarred by use, morning conversations took place about school, work, the bills that insistently arrived. And amidst these trivial conversations, there was laughter, there was affection, there was a daily attempt to keep the home afloat, even in the face of difficulties. But there was also something that was off, something that little by little began to catch everyone's attention. The girl of the house, small with a deep, silent gaze, a gaze that seemed to carry more than her age could explain. She wasn't like the other children in the neighborhood. She didn't run as much, didn't play in the street, didn't bother with the noises of childhood. Her most constant companion was a pencil, and her safest escape was always on paper. For hours on end, she would sit, almost motionless, scribbling endlessly. It was as if the world around her had disappeared, and only that repetitive gesture remained. Steady hand, quick strokes, eyes fixed on the drawing. And what did she draw? The answer seemed simple, but it hid something that no one could understand. Spiders, only spiders. Small, large, some with spindly legs, others with minute details on their fangs. In some papers, the webs took up the entire space, barely recognizable. Trapping. In others, the focus was solely on the animal's body, drawn with a precision unsettling for one so young. At first, the parents smiled. They thought it was curious, perhaps just a phase, like so many others children go through. They saved some papers, praised their traits, and encouraged their creativity. But as the days passed, something changed. These weren't just innocent scribbles. There were hundreds of drawings, entire notebooks filled, sheets left around the house, hidden in drawers, forgotten under the bed. And there was no variation, no sun, no trees, no people, only spiders. It was as if each stroke held a secret, as if each new line were a piece of a puzzle that no one could decipher. One morning the father asked in a light tone, "Why only spiders?" But the girl remained silent, her eyes fixed on the paper, as if she hadn't even heard the question. The mother tried another approach, offering new colored pencils, notebooks full of blank pages, even children's books with vibrant characters. But nothing worked. The girl continued, and each new drawing seemed darker, more realistic, as if inspired by something she had seen firsthand. The family began to worry. Some relatives, when visiting the house, whispered in corners, quietly wondering if this was normal. Others simply stared at the scattered papers and looked away, uncomfortable. But what no one noticed was the most disturbing detail. It wasn't just loose spiders, like random figures. In several drawings there was a background, the same background. Lines that repeated themselves, shadows that formed, as if she were portraying a specific place. And in the center of this place, always the same figure, a door. A dark, narrow door with rusty latches. A door that actually existed inside that house. It was the basement door. And the most disturbing thing, the girl had never been there. Never. Dad had kept the basement locked for years. It was just a storage place for forgotten boxes, or so they said. But then, how could the girl draw every detail of that door? How could she know about the broken lock, the worn wood, the crack that cut into the side of the wall? It was as if someone or something was showing her everything. And the more the mystery grew, the more the feeling of discomfort spread throughout the house. The parents tried to convince themselves that these were just coincidences, that they were just imagining things. But deep down, they knew there was something strange, something they didn't understand. And with each passing day, the drawings became more intense, darker, closer to reality. To the point where one question began to plague everyone. What was the girl really trying to show? Or worse, what was trying to show itself through her? At first, the parents thought it was just a curiosity, a strange taste, perhaps a phase like so many others they'd seen in children. Some like cars, others dolls, others spent talking about imaginary animals. To them, drawing spiders didn't seem all that alarming, but time passed, and the drawings multiplied. First it was an entire notebook, filled from cover to cover. Then two. Soon loose pages began appearing in the most unexpected places, inside drawers, under the bed, on the dining table, as if every corner of the house was little by little taken over by those long-legged, shadowy-bodied figures, until the bedroom walls also became a pencil canvas. Marks appeared behind the door, charcoal near the headboard, near the window. Spiders in every corner, always different, always new. What once seemed harmless now turned into something suffocating. The house, already simple and silent, began to take on a heavy, almost claustrophobic atmosphere, as if the drawings weren't just drawings, but presences. And along with that, the signs began. The previously quiet girl began waking up startled in the middle of the night. Other times, sometimes she sat in bed, panting, her eyes fixed on the floor. She claimed to hear footsteps coming from the basement. Slow, heavy footsteps, as if someone were pacing back and forth beneath them. Her parents tried to calm her, telling her it was just her imagination, that the wind was making noises, that the old wood was creaking. But deep down, even they couldn't fully believe their own words, because some nights even they swore they heard it, a distant dragging, a sudden echo of something that shouldn't be there. The girl, however, seemed increasingly connected to that forbidden space. Her long, fixed gaze always stopped at the same spot, the locked basement door. It was as if something invisible was calling her, as if there were a connection between her and whatever was hidden behind that ancient wood. The days became more tense. Conversations between the parents, previously filled with laughter and small plans, began to revolve around worries. They whispered to each other, away from their daughter, trying to understand what was happening. Was it just imagination, a disorder, or something beyond reason? But nothing would prepare any of them for what was to come. It was on a rainy night that everything changed. The wind howled outside, rattling the narrow windows, and the darkness seemed even denser than usual. Father got up to check the locks while Mother tidied the kitchen. Everything seemed normal until they noticed the silence. Uncomfortable silence. And heavy. The daughter was not in her room. Mother's heart raced. She called her name, first softly, then louder. No response. Father hurried down the hall, each footstep echoing on the hardwood floor. And then they found her. The girl was standing in front of the basement door, completely still. In her small hands she held a drawing. The paper trembled slightly, as if it were difficult to hold steady. Her eyes fixed on the door, unblinking. She hadn't even noticed entranced her parents' presence. The father, breathing heavily, bent down to pick up the drawing. When he saw it, he felt a deep shiver run down his spine. On the paper, there was a huge spider, bigger than any other the girl had drawn so far. Its eyes were just dark smudges, and its paws filled every corner of the page. But that wasn't all. Beside the spider, there was another figure, a faceless figure. Silence filled the hallway. The mother tried to call out to her daughter, but the girl remained standing there, staring at the door, as if she were waiting for something or someone to come out. The rain was beating down heavily outside, and at that moment the house felt colder than ever. It was impossible not to feel. Something was moving between those walls, something no one wanted to face. And at that moment a thought inevitably arose. What if what was in the basement wasn't trapped? What if, through her, you had already started dating? The father grabbed his daughter's arm and pulled her back, trying to lead her to her room. But the girl resisted for a brief moment. Her lips moved almost a whisper, and even through the rain and wind they could hear, "He calls me." The door creaked, as if in response. A sharp click echoed from the lock. The father, trembling, carried her in his arms and walked away. But everyone knew there was no point in pretending anymore. Something was happening in there, something that could no longer be ignored, and what they discovered next would change everything forever. Unable to bear the mystery any longer, the parents decided to open the basement. It was late at night, and the silence seemed thicker than ever. Father trembled as he turned the ancient key, which resisted as if it didn't want to be used. The cold metal seemed to hold everyone's breath. The wood creaked as it opened, revealing a darkness that seemed alive. A heavy breath of air escaped from within, laden with a thick smell of mildew and rust. It was as if decades of silence and oblivion had condensed there, waiting to be released. The first step echoed like thunder. The floor creaked with each movement, and every sound seemed too loud in the darkness. A lamp hanging from the ceiling was turned on, but the dim light barely illuminated the space, casting thick shadows on the walls. Inside, they found something they never imagined. Among the old boxes, dust-covered furniture, and forgotten objects, there were marks, many marks, engraved in the wood of the walls, scratched repeatedly, as if insistent hands had made them in desperation. Strange symbols, deformed figures, traces identical to those the girl drew in her notebooks. The father, overcome with a shiver, approached to touch. The wood seemed colder there, as if it had absorbed something it shouldn't have. Each symbol seemed to pulse, as if concealing a hidden meaning incomprehensible to them. And then, in the darkest corner, they saw it wasn't a living animal. It wasn't moving, but it seemed to be looking back at them. A spider, not of flesh and bone, but made of twisted iron and rusted wires intertwined into the shape of legs. The object seemed to have been hand-formed with disturbing precision as part of something larger. It was ancient, so ancient that rust had eaten away part of its structure. Yet there was a strange force emanating from it, a suffocating sensation, as if the object were more than metal, as if it carried stories, memories, or something trapped within. The father instinctively recoiled. The mother clapped her hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a scream. But the girl showed no fear. With slow steps, she approached the corner. Her eyes shone as if she were finally confronted with something familiar. She raised her finger and pointed. His voice was low, but clear enough to send a chill down his parents' spines. This is where they come from. The silence after that sentence seemed deafening. The father tried to react, asking in a trembling voice, "What are you talking about? What does that mean?" But the girl didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the object, as if no one else were there. It was then that they realized, on the walls surrounding the metallic spider, there were even more symbols. They weren't just random scribbles. There was a sequence, a pattern, as if they were instructions or part of a ritual. Stacked boxes hid some of the drawings, but enough was exposed to evoke terror. The shapes resembled gigantic spiders, not ordinary ones, but deformed ones, with excessive eyes and disproportionate bodies. Beside them, human figures knelt in positions of supplication or fear. The mother, trying to contain her panic, turned to her husband and whispered, "This isn't a child's thing. This was already here, long before her." The father, not knowing what to say, just held his wife's arm tighter. The girl, in turn, took another. Her small fingers brushed against the dust accumulated on the metal object. At the same moment, a sharp crack echoed through the basement. The lamp swayed in the ceiling, as if something had moved in the air. Her parents quickly pulled her back, but it was too late. The feeling inside the basement had changed. It was as if the environment was breathing. The air became heavier, denser, charged with an invisible energy that tightened the chest. And then the girl looked at them. Her eyes looked different, darker, deeper. She said almost in a whisper, "They never left." The mother hugged her tightly, trying to protect her, but the phrase kept echoing in the heads of the two adults. What did that mean? Who had never left? What did that iron spider really represent? In that moment, they understood something terrible. Their daughter's drawings weren't figments of imagination. They were memories, echoes of something forgotten, but still present within that house. And worst of all, the basement didn't just store objects. He kept secrets, secrets that were finally beginning to awaken. But the scariest thing wasn't the object. It wasn't the iron spider, nor the symbols scratched into the walls. What really froze the parents' hearts was something that seemed, at first glance, so simple, so banal, but which hid the most disturbing secret of all. Behind the rusty object, nearly buried by boxes and pieces of old wood, there was something forgotten, a notebook. Small, with a worn cover, so old that the edges were crumbling to the touch. The accumulated dust betrayed decades of silence. Dad picked it up carefully, wiping the dust off its surface with a trembling hand. The dried-out leather cover looked as if it might fall apart at any moment. But the notebook's condition wasn't what mattered. That's what was inside him. When they opened it, both of their breaths caught in their chests. The pages were covered with drawings. They were spiders. The same spiders that her daughter drew every day, identical. Page after page, every stroke seemed to echo the present. The shapes, the proportions, even the most minute details were the same. There was no difference between what her daughter scribbled and what was there in that notebook yellowed with age. The mother put her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. The father, in disbelief, leafed through it quickly, as if searching for some logical explanation. But with each new page, the similarity became more disturbing, and then they saw the signature. At the bottom of several pages was a name. It was written in childish handwriting, shaky but legible. It belonged to another child, a boy, who had lived in that same house decades before. The silence fell heavily. The parents' eyes met, desperate, as if searching for an answer in each other. But there was no answer, only more questions. The father murmured, almost without a voice, that's not possible. However, the girl seemed calm. Her fingers ran lightly over the drawings, as if she recognized each stroke, each line as if they were her own. Her lips moved and she whispered, "I already know all of this." The sentence cut through the air like a blade. The father dropped the notebook on the floor. The dry sound echoed through the basement. The metallic object in the corner seemed to glow in the dim light, as if reacting to the revelation. The atmosphere grew denser, almost suffocating. The mother, overcome with despair, leafed through the last pages. It was then that he realized something even more terrifying. They weren't just spiders. Among the drawings there were also human figures. Small children, their faces blurred, surrounded by web-like lines. In some, larger figures could be seen, shadowy figures lurking in the background. And at the end of the notebook, a last page, an incomplete drawing, but clear enough to chill the blood in your veins. It was the image of a door, basement door. The same, and beside her, two figures, a woman and a man. Adults, with features frighteningly similar to theirs. The mother dropped the notebook, her eyes welling up with tears. The father, unable to articulate words, just took a few steps back, as if he wanted to escape from something invisible. The girl, however, did not seem scared. She picked up the notebook from the floor, hugged it to her chest, and said with disturbing calm, he also heard the footsteps. The silence that followed. Neither of the two adults dared ask who he was. They didn't need to. They already knew that the answer was written there on each yellowed page. It was as if time had repeated itself, as if the same story was being told again, decades later, just with different characters, or maybe not so different. The father, his voice breaking, murmured, "This can't be happening." But deep down, everyone already knew it was happening, and the scariest thing would have stopped. That maybe it never. With each moment inside that basement, the feeling that something was watching grew stronger, as if by opening the notebook, not just memories had been awakened, but presences that had never left. And at that moment, a certainty took hold of them. That house didn't just hold memories. He kept stories that insisted on repeating themselves, stories that never ended, stories that were just waiting for the next chapter. That night, the parents understood that these were not just drawings. They were not simple childish lines nor scribbles of a fertile imagination. They were memories, fragments of something that existed before them, before the girl herself, echoes of a story that had never been explained. The truth was not revealed in direct words, but insinuated itself in every detail, in the repeated symbols, in the lines that seemed more alive than ink on paper, in the invisible weight that surrounded that house. They finally understood that they were not just dealing with a child with a strange gift. They were faced with the continuation of a secret. The girl, with almost supernatural calm, closed the ancient notebook with her small hands. The sound of the cover creaking echoed through the basement, like the closing of a door that should never be opened again. And then she whispered, "Shorty," in a voice that seemed not to be just hers. Some secrets don't want to be forgotten. They just wait for the right moment to come back. At that moment, the parents felt something they had never felt before. It wasn't just fear. It was the certainty of helplessness. No matter what they did, no matter how many times they tried to deny it, there were forces in that house that they could not control. From that day on, no one dared to open the basement again. The key was hidden, the door remained closed, and the subject silenced. But silence did not bring peace. The drawings kept appearing. Now, not just in the girls' notebooks, sometimes streaked in the steam of the bathroom mirror in the morning, other times engraved in the dust on the window. And one morning, the mother woke up and found a loose sheet of paper next to her bed. In it, a perfectly drawn spider surrounded by lines that expanded like an endless web. No one ever found out who left that sheet there, but deep down, she already knew the answer. With each new drawing, the feeling was the same. It wasn't just about the daughter. It was as if the whole house had learned to draw, as if the structure itself, the walls, the air, held the memory of that secret that refused to die. Time passed, but the weight never went away. The girl grew up, the parents grew old, but spiders, they never stopped appearing. Always present, always remembering. And perhaps that's the scariest thing, realizing that some mysteries just can't be solved. They don't look for an answer. They just exist. And as long as there are people who witness them, they will continue to happen again, because there are stories that have no end. There are secrets that don't disappear. They just wait. And when the time comes, they come back. And in that house, the parents learned a bitter lesson. Sometimes the greatest terror is not in what is seen, but in what insists on remaining. And when the threads of life intertwine with the threads of a web, there is no escape.